Thank you, Pastor White.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be before you all today. My name is Bryson White. I'm a minister at Saints Rest Baptist Church in West Fresno, and I'm also a community organizer with PICO, California. PICO, we do faith-based community organizing up and down the state of California and across the nation. We have 19 federations in California. We serve 480 congregations, and we have 250,000 people who are connected to our network. We connect clergy and leaders from different faith traditions to issues of justice in our city. But most importantly in our organizing, we believe that human dignity should be at the center of our public policy. And so out of my faith tradition and out of the majority of faith traditions on the planet, we all believe that everyone is created in the image of God and that everyone has intrinsic value to their life and that our public policy should reflect this. Unfortunately, in the United States of America and specifically with law enforcement, people of color have been criminalized in our country and dehumanized and not seen as the image bearers of God in which we are. In our communities, law enforcement officers are seen as occupying forces instead of partners in public safety. Just a few weeks ago at St. Rest Baptist Church in West Fresno, in response to the ruling around Officer Darren Wilson and Eric Gardner and the officer-involved shootings that take place in Fresno, California, we had a town hall at Saints Rest, and we had about 100 people turn out. And we lifted up our stories around what our interactions have been like with law enforcement. We had 20 to 30 people actually share stories around their negative interactions with law enforcement. We had people talking about how they were placed on curbs, people were beat by law enforcement, story after story about being followed around by law enforcement in communities and feeling intimidated by law enforcement who's supposed to be policing our communities and keeping us safe. I myself, when I was 19 years old, was followed by a police officer for around a mile. I knew he was following me. I was making sure I was under the speed limit. He actually approached my car with his service weapon drawn out. That's how he knocked on my window with his pistol. Actually, he knocked on my window with his pistol, and I was afraid for my life. But due to the training that I received from my parents in regards to how to interact with law enforcement, because they knew that I would come into situations where my life would be on the line because I would be confronted with the law enforcement apparatus, I actually left that situation with my life. In many instances, unfortunately, people of color are leaving these situations without their lives intact, and it's a disgrace to this country and to our communities. Earlier today, I want to lift this up, but jot a little note down when I was here listening. There was two white gentlemen who said that the process is working. Is what they said. The process around data collection and the process around policing our communities is working. And the irony of this situation to me is that two white men are saying that the process is working when it's people of color that are dying at the hands of law enforcement in our communities. And that doesn't make any sense, right? So you had two people who are disconnected from the pain of the wreckage of law enforcement practice in our community, lifting up a narrative that is false, that the process is working. As my sister said to my left, that every 28 hours, a person of color, a black person, is killed by law enforcement in the United States. And that tells you right there that this process is not working. Unless the process is intended to be an occupying force, in that sense, the process would be working. But if the intent is to provide public safety, then the process of policing in this country and in California is not working. Also, what I found interesting in regards to the gentleman who lifted it up, and that's a narrative that I hear back home from our police chief and from local law enforcement officials, that the process is working. But we have 10% of officer-involved shootings across the country take place in California cities alone. And so that's another sign that shows that this process is not working, in which we need our legislative body to step in to be able to pass legislation that ensures the lives of all people are valued. And so we have that every 28 hours piece. And so what's crucial to me in lifting up this narrative around law enforcement and community trust is the mantra of Black Lives Matters. And so this is a mantra that we've seen taken to the streets in Oakland, California, Richmond. We've seen it in Ferguson. We've seen it in New York. We've seen it in Fresno. And it's critical that law enforcement actually begins to believe that Black Lives Matters, because if law enforcement doesn't believe that Black Lives Matters, we're going to continue to see the epidemic of officer-involved shootings in our country. And I say that intentionally when I say epidemic. One of the things that really bothers me as a minister in the area in which I serve, where law enforcement is routinely harassing people of color and also shooting at people of color, is the wreckage that is left behind amongst our young people. When an officer is involved in a shooting, he's afforded the counseling needed for him to process what has actually happened in the situation. But young people in our community, they're not afforded that same process. And so when an officer shoots down a person in our community, what do we do and who do we turn to process the trauma that leaves in our neighborhoods? We don't have anyone.
Please, we don't allow applauding or comments from the audience. Thank you.
Yeah, no applauding. They're just feeling what I'm talking about because they feel the pain. But I hear you, Sister Hancock. Yeah, I do.
But we do this for everybody.
Yeah, I hear you, Sister Hancock. But what do we do when we don't have places to go and to process that trauma? A situation in Fresno that I would like to lift to you all in 2013 that came to pass was there was an incident between law enforcement and a community member, and Fresno Police Department rolled a tactical unit down a residential street in West Fresno, which community members described as a tank. I don't know the exact term of what that tactical unit is called, but it looked like a tank to me. And so those sorts of incidences which bear out in places and communities of color is a major piece on why communities of color have distrust towards law enforcement officials. But I also would like to lift up two incidences in which we're seeing some progress being made in community relations with law enforcement, and that would be through some of the work that has taken place through PICO federations in Oakland with the Oakland Police Department, where Pastor Cummings and others have been afforded the opportunity to be able to train the Oakland Police Department on implicit bias, which is really critical because everyone in a racialized society carries implicit bias, and so that's going to bear out in whatever job that we're in. So it also bears out in law enforcement, and so that has bridged some community trust with the police department, from my understanding, and also what our brother in Richmond lifted up around the Lifelines to Healing work in Richmond, California, where there's been, through ceasefire initiatives, there's been a drastic reduction in officer-involved shootings and in gun violence in the city. So those are some two examples and it just lifts up and shows that that what's put out there in our communities, what's happening, doesn't have to be the case. This isn't a space where we're left stuck and can't cause change between law enforcement and our community relations. So that's one, some other instances which I think which are powerful. I think something I need to lift up as well, as you can see me kind of going through my rough notes here, is that today we've been talking about data a lot, which is so important, and we've been talking about these pieces, but I find it hard for me to process that there's only one panel for conversation from community members, and there's only three of us, when there's so many people who work in our communities around law enforcement and community relations issues, and we don't have anybody here who is really testifying to the pain throughout the day of what it means to be brutalized by police departments. So I wanted to lift that up to you all, that the next time that we come together to provide adequate space for a diversity of community voices to be able to lift up the pain in our community, because it's not enough to talk about data. It's more important to put a person's face to what that data actually entails. Lastly, because I can see the look on Sister Hancock's face, so I'll conclude. I know it's been a long day for you all, but for us, this leads for us to believe that Cal Grip needs to be funded more efficiently, for more dollars to go into that program, so that we can increase community police relations and reduce not only gun violence in the urban setting, but gun violence of law enforcement officials towards people of color, and particularly in California. And then just in conclusion, again, I wrap all this within the narrative that comes out of the Judeo-Christian tradition, that all people are created in the image of a holy and loving God, and our public policy really needs to be reflective of that. So I thank you for your time.
Assemblywoman Weber.
Well, first of all, I want to thank those who are here, thank the members for organizing this, and I've been very quiet during this process, just listening. Like most of you, I've been to so many of these hearings before. I'm probably overloaded with information, much more than I probably need to have. But let me just simply say that I think, well, I think there's a lot of things we can do, and I think we must do. I mean, I think when we say this is a unique opportunity, it really is. The question is whether or not, as a legislature, we have the courage to do it. You know, we can say that the bills are coming late, but I've been to so many gut and men experiences around here that I know that there's never anything called a late bill that you really want. Right. So that's number one. Where there's a will, there's always a way up in here, you know. So I'm not going to hide behind deadlines and things like that, because I know everybody's got all these spot bills and everything else they can do a whole lot of magic with if we choose to. I think it is critical, though, that we do look carefully at what the judge has told us, Judge Corbett, who was here, because it was very clear that probably of all the persons we've had come, she's had probably the greatest amount of experience that gives her inside and outside information about and working with communities about these things that need to be done, that can easily be done by us in this body to basically standardize policing across the state. People want to have this county by county experience, but most of us don't live county by county. You know, I get out and go driving to meetings, and I drive to 3 or 4 different police department jurisdictions, and all in my district. You know, I've got 3 or 4 different police departments. I can't afford to have every police department with a different policy on policing and expect me or even my residents to know what I'm supposed to do every time I cross from LA, from San Diego to La Mesa to Lemon Grove to National City. I can't figure out, you know, well, is this the time that they can film me with the camera, without a camera? Do they have to notify me of this and not notify me of that? There has to be, as she's pointed out, some standardized policing across the state in terms of policies in order to protect the citizens of California. That's number one. Even though we talk about drugs, the reality is it's really about race. We can talk it bias, you can call it anything you want to call it, but it's really racial. And we have to deal with that, because even if we get rid of drugs, there will still be some biases about enforcement, period. Walking down the street, do you look safe, not safe? Do you have a gun? Did you not have a gun? I mean, those are the things that we have to really get to in terms of making it inconvenient for people to engage in the practice of profiling, simply because if they have to report all of their incidents and their conflicts and those kinds of things, then it becomes, at least it becomes to their level of consciousness. Oh my God, look what I did. I've arrested this many people, and all of a sudden, look, my whole list is these kind of folks versus these kind of folks. Mm-hmm. And so I think at some point we have to deal with that issue, that regardless of whether drugs are legal or not or whatever, that's just one other method that's going to be used, but there'll be another method found. And so it really is important that we really get to the core issue and not just start Band-Aid patching up stuff here and there, because if so, we'll find ourselves in the same condition, because as the situations change, people find different things to do. Some of you may have heard this thing called lemon drop in San Diego, which is, I don't know if you've heard about it, where they're arresting people before they commit crimes in order to prevent them from committing crimes. And it had to do with folks coming out of realignment, and the police department discovered that most of them rode the trolley in this little city of mine called Lemon Grove. So they get on the bus in Lemon Grove, and they go through the trolley, seeing if you have a ticket. Now, normally we have lots of little trolley police, and they give you a little ticket you got to pay for if you didn't have your little ticket. Well, if you don't have it, they take you off the bus, sit you on the curb. So you look out, and there's all these black and brown folks sitting on the curb, and they're going through them running checks to see if they have been released on realignment. And if they have, then they put them back in jail, because they said if they're basically violating the law, or if they have any kind of paraphernalia on them without justification, without even thinking, then they arrest them again, because then that will prevent them from doing crime. And so I never heard of being arrested before you actually commit a crime in order not to commit a crime, but this is what is happening. And it's publicly known. They said this is because of public safety. We want to protect the public. This was in one of our recent newspapers, and so it was verified in the whole bit. So it really is a challenge to constantly talk about over-policing, the suspicions and the things that occur, and then the impact it has on people's lives when you get caught up in this system, because then it promotes all kinds of other things, loss of job, loss of this, loss of that, and then you begin that spiral, that downward spiral. So I think it is critical. We've gotten some recommendations here. We've got some bills already out that will be coming forward. I'm hoping members will carefully look at it, that we won't get caught up in the individual jurisdiction story, that every police department needs to make its own decision about how it's going to police people and all those kinds of things. That's really a cop-out. Or we could say, well, one person got it right and the rest of them didn't. That's not acceptable in California, to have all these different things going on. And we notice that, and because all of us live in California, not just in a little area where we happen to drive or walk occasionally. We live in California. So I'm optimistic that maybe we will do something significant. But if you're like me, you're kind of tired because you've heard these stories before. And you've met the good people. I know all the good people in San Diego Police. I know all the good ones, from the chief of police down to the community people that are really good people. And somehow or another, they're not the ones who are stopping our kids on the street and who are putting them on gang lists. Right. And when they're not even gang members. I've had my son put on there and had to get him off because I don't know even how that happened. And those kinds of things, and constantly being stopped and stopped and stopped. And so it really is a situation, sometimes we look at it, and if you are African American and Latino in this country, it is not the most happy experience when you look in your rearview mirror and you see the lights. No, and it's not, and you looking and seeing, you're driving within the speed limit, there's nothing wrong with your car, and you're thinking, oh my God, what now? Mm-hmm. And you know it's going to be an experience where they're going to take you out your car, sit you on the curb. You see this every day up and down our community, people sitting on curbs, police going through every seat, everything, looking for what? I mean, no notice that there's been a crime in the area. And eventually they'll stand the kids up and talk to them and then put them back in their car. Mm-hmm. You know, after the humiliation of all their friends driving down the street, seeing them sitting on the curb. So this is really an ugly situation. My son used to hate him. Every time he went to university, they would stop him, and only to discover that his car was registered to one of the most famous professors on the campus, Shirley. And that would then set everybody in a tizzy. But, you know, it's that kind of thing. They would sit him on the curb, and he'd be embarrassed, sitting there on the curb, and all the college students walking by, he and his other black guy, and they're going through my car, my truck, looking for stuff, only to discover it's my car. And he hadn't done anything. He was coming out of the exercise room. So, and it happened so much he stopped going. He just didn't decide he wouldn't exercise up there anymore. So it's that kind of thing that you live with, and it's the kind of thing that our kids should not have to live with. And I think that's the key that's there. They should not have to live their lives with this level of anxiety, because the reality is, if it happens to you enough, you're going to blow up one time. You're going to get mad. And then we're going to talk about these angry black men in America. You know, James Baldwin says, and I say it all the time to folks, that James Baldwin told us that a black man who lives in America, who is conscious of his blackness, is in a constant state of rage. And that most of those who learn to survive have what we call a condition of control rage. Right. But every now and then, that rage gets out of control because you see all the time the difference that's made of you, the discrimination, and the unjust treatment. And you learn to adjust, and you learn to do it. But every now and then we see in these communities where that rage can no longer be contained and our students explode. And so our task is to hopefully create a better environment for them. So I really appreciate you folks coming and at least giving us the pain, because it is very painful. It is very painful to be in America and know that your children and even yourself will always be overanalyzed, overexamined, and at the end of the day, will probably not get the justice. We didn't hear not one police officer who said their system was broken. They all told us everything was fine. You know, LAPD said they were great, you know, that kind of stuff and all that kind of thing. Okay. And I know that. I used to live in LA, see, and I know they train on that. So, when we listened to everybody had it down pat. They were good. It's not only you, but at our retreat last week, everybody was wonderful. Just absolutely wonderful, just having a love fest going on. And I know that is not the case, because we wouldn't be in such a tizzy with all these meetings in our community if there was such a marvelous love fest going on. So that they're in somewhat of a denial as well about how deep the problem is and maybe how to solve it, because it's deeply rooted in sometimes the culture of the institutions, and that is not an easy thing to remove. So thank you folks for coming. I appreciate you, and I appreciate our chairs.
Well, thank you. Very much.
Good afternoon, Rosa Aqeel with PICO, California. I just wanted to make a couple observations. First, I think it's really unfortunate that all of the law enforcement officers have left. I think that if those are the good guys, then that's really, really concerning. I would hope that they would want to hear what the community has to say, especially given that most of the folks that are speaking are folks of color. I also want to underscore one of the points that Dr. Weber made, and that is that not a single one of the officers really owned up to the state sanctions violence that they are a part of, whether directly or indirectly. And I think that while the intention of trying to show the, quote, good guys is okay, I think what it ends up doing when you have officer after officer try to prove that they're the good guys instead of acknowledging that there's a problem, all it does is further build distrust. And it builds the chasm that exists already between communities of color and law enforcement. And so I think that we have to be really thoughtful about what that's really saying. Because if those really are the good guys, and not even the good guys will say that Black Lives Matter, that people of color matter, that there are things that are messed up in existing practices, then how are we ever to trust them if not even those few will own up to that truth? And so I think that
Thank you.